37-year-old Denis Nilsen thought that he could kill, maim, boil, burn, and literally flush his fellow human beings down the toilet and out of existence and get away with it forever. Well, he did, until he got caught. This is the story of the one and only top-ranked serial killer, Denis Nilsen, who murdered 15 young men in a span of 4 years. Were it not for the plumber who discovered the human pieces in his apartment's manhole, Denis Nilsen would have never been caught. In the murderer's own words, "Had you not caught me when you did, it would not have been 15, but 150. But how did Nilsen, an ordinary civil servant, manage to murder and get away with murder 15 times without anyone noticing? Hello, this is the Barrister and welcome to the channel. Please feel free to use these 8 seconds to subscribe. By the way, it is free. Thank you for subscribing. Shout out to It's Trending KE for sharing my videos and subscribing as well. You are a real gem. If you want a shout out in the next video, please subscribe and comment down below, and I will surely mention you in the next video. Now, let us get into the story. In the early winter of 1983, on 8th February to be specific, a problem arose in Muswell Hill in London. It all began with a phone call regarding a blocked toilet in these apartments known as number 23 Cranley Gardens that had by then been subdivided into bedsitter. The residents of these apartments had experienced toilet blockages for some time. The plumber called to work on the blocked toilets did his job properly, but he remarked to his dispatcher that he had never felt such a foul smell emanating from an apartment before. Well, the plumbing issues did not stop, and all the 5 tenants of 23 Cranley Gardens got together and decided to complain to the landlord. A handwritten letter was delivered to the landlord saying that it was incapable for anyone to continue living in such deplorable conditions with blocked toilets. And that letter was written by none other but Denis Nilsen. So the plumber decided to check on the drains beneath the house. He lifted the metal cover and an awful smell hit him. What he saw shocked him to death. The plumber described what he saw as some butcher's prepared meat and a few bones. The plumber then discovered, what was blocking the toilets was actually human flesh. The plumber had been down there close to 5 or 6 times, and by then he had discovered that those were actually human remains. The plumber made a phone call to his boss, surrounded by the residents of the apartment, including the author of the handwritten letter, one and only Denis Nilsen. The plumber told his boss about the discovery, and his boss told him to leave it and they will check on it in the morning. On realizing that he was almost getting caught, Nilsen made an attempt to cover his tracks. 2 witnesses testified that at around 1 a.m. that night, some hours before daybreak and the plumber's return, they heard some noises. And when they checked, they found that Nilsen, who was the tenant upstairs, was standing at the door of the apartments and he was wearing a vest in the cold February evening. But he was sweating and all dirty. The cops later learned that what Nilsen had done was that he had gone inside the manhole and removed the human pieces that the plumber had put on the ledge in the manhole. On 9th February 1983, that is the next day, the landlords called the police and asked them to head over to 23 Cranley Gardens. In the freezing cold and winter, 2 cops got to the apartment and they were shown the manhole where the human pieces had been discovered. The cops discovered that the drains were blocked over halfway up the building, meaning that what was blocking the toilets was coming from the very top. The tenant of the top apartment was Denis Nilsen, a 37-year-old civil servant in a nearby workstation. By the time the cops got there, he was away at work, but he was set to return at 5:30 p.m., so the 2 cops decided to wait for him. Nilsen walked in at 5:30, and one cop said to him, "Mr. Nilsen?" And he answered, "Yes, that's me." And the cop continued, "I have come about your drains." And a smile lit up Nilsen's face, and he asked the cop, "Well, since when have police been interested in blocked drains?" And the cop said, "Well, you take me up to your flat and I'll tell you all about it." When the cops got to the apartment, they were met by a foul smell of decomposing flesh. The cop then told Nilsen, "I am here because your drains were blocked with human remains." And Nilsen remarked, "Oh my God, how awful." And the cop looked him straight in the eye and told Nilsen, "Don't mess about. Where is the rest of the body?" Nilsen paused for a bit, then stated, "In plastic bags in the next room." He was then arrested immediately and taken to the station for questioning. In the police car on the way to the station, one cop sat with Nilsen at the back while the other cop drove. So the cop at the back began making conversation with Nilsen. He asked Nilsen, "So are we talking about one body here or maybe two?" Probably he had seen the size of the plastic bags and was thinking to himself, that can be one person. Maybe two, or if it's just one, it must be a really big person. So he asks Nilsen, "Are we talking about one body here or maybe two?" And Nilsen answers, "Neither. I think it is 16. If you are still with me up to this point, it means that you like my content and would like to see more of this content. So please give this video a like and subscribe. By the way, both are absolutely free. Nilsen was interviewed over 16 times in 31 hours. He sang about the murders like a songbird. To him, he had nothing to hide. In fact, Nilsen described the day of his arrest as the day help arrived. Over a 4-year period, he had killed 15 young men, and not 16 as he had earlier thought. In 23 Cranley Gardens, in the wardrobes, cops found 2 black plastic bags and some air fresheners. The plastic bags contained bones and 2 heads. The 2 heads had been boiled in a large pot or saucepan that Nilsen had in his flat. The purpose of the boiling was to remove all the flesh attached to the skull, then flush the flesh down the toilet, and separately dispose of the bones through the ordinary dustbin. There was another tea chest which contained bones, another torso, and a skull. Under a drawer in the bathroom were legs and a pelvis. All these were the remains of 3 men. Nilsen had previously lived in 195 Melrose Avenue for 6 years. He occupied the rare ground floor flat with exclusive access to the garden. When asked what police will find there, he stated that unless the property had been cleared by construction workers, the cops were likely to find bone ash belonging to 12 or 13 people. He even drew a map of the property there to show police where he had burnt his victims. The cops visited the place and dug up the garden. There, they found the remains of at least 8 more people. As the interviews continued, news of the murder began to leak to different news outlets, courtesy of the plumber who had sold the story for about £300. Weirdly enough, Nilsen often asked the cops interviewing him whether the murders had started gaining publicity, to which the cops responded in the affirmative. He was even shown the trending headlines and issued several newspapers to read. He was not concerned about what he had done or that people will find out his secret murders. No, not at all. He was mainly concerned with whether the media had gotten every little detail right. Oh, and another thing he was always concerned about was his dog Bleep. He always asked the detectives about Bleep, and when the detectives told him that Bleep had to be put down, his answer was, "Oh well, he was always that friend to me. He never asked any questions." 48 hours after his arrest, Nilsen was arraigned in court to face the first of the murder charges. Unlike many murderers, he declined to have a blanket put over his head. Even when the cops offered to hold the blanket for him, he totally refused and insisted that he had nothing to hide. News then began to emerge that Denis Nilsen was once a cop who worked for 11 months before quitting his cop job to become a civil servant. Nilsen's first murder was on 30th December 1978. He had been drinking at a pub. At closing time, he was talking to a guy known as Stephen Holmes, and Stephen became aware that Nilsen had a bottle at home. One way or another, he went home with Nilsen. In the morning, Stephen was lying on top of one of the beds, and Nilsen was on the other bed. He was dead, and Nilsen came to the conclusion that he had killed him. When asked by the detectives why he thought so, he said he just thought he was dead since Stephen had wanted to leave, but Nilsen wanted him to stay. Nilsen had strangled Stephen using a tie and a rope before drowning him in water. Nilsen looked after the body. He washed the body, put it in a comfy position, sometimes even being put on an armchair, and even to bed. You may think that this was tiring, but no, to Nilsen, this was more than satisfying. So, a typical day for Nilsen will be him waking up next to a corpse, having breakfast with the corpse, sitting up the corpse with a newspaper or magazine for the day, then Nilsen leaving for work. In the evening, Nilsen will get home from work to be received by a corpse. He will then say to the corpse, "Guess what happened to me at work today?" He will then bathe the corpse, have dinner with the corpse, go to bed with the corpse, and the cycle will basically repeat itself until he gets bored with the corpse and wants to bring another live human being into the cycle. I even feel weird telling this story. Anyway, after a while, Nilsen kept Stephen's corpse under the floorboards of his home in Melrose Avenue for 8 months before it started to decay. He thereafter dismembered the remaining remains, and in the middle of the night, he lit a bonfire in the garden. A common tactic that he used to mask the awful smell of burnt, decomposing human flesh was placing rubber tires on top of the fire. It is said that sometimes kids will surround the bonfire, singing play songs and unaware of the burning human flesh. The second victim, 23-year-old Kenneth James Ockenden, had gone missing in December 1979. He was a Canadian who had traveled to central London as a tourist. He met Nilsen at a pub, and for whatever reason, they went back to Nilsen's flat. Kenneth told Nilsen that he was going home either that night or the next morning, and that would therefore mark the end of their relationship. Kenneth was sitting in Nilsen's flat, listening to music on his headphones. By then, that is 1979, all the headphones had wires on them, unlike today in 2022. So Nilsen got hold of the wires and strangled Kenneth to death. His disappearance led to a wide missing persons campaign, but little did they know that Nilsen had killed him on the same day he vanished. There are various theories, opinions, and beliefs as to why Nilsen did what he did, but what stood out for me the most is that Nilsen murdered those whose company he wanted to keep. Nilsen did not have the social skills or capacity to nurture a normal relationship, and so when he wanted to keep a relationship running, he murdered the man for fear of being left alone. This has come to be referred by renowned author Brian Masters as killing for company. Contrary to what the press wanted you to believe back then, not every victim or survivor of Nilsen's was a homosexual. Yes, some were homosexuals, but some were also rent boys and some were also straight people. All of them, however, were vulnerable people. People who were susceptible to people offering them a bit of comfort or help. People who had issues, or people who were running away from their problems. He sought those who were not likely to be missed, and this is why he got away with murder for so long. Another common opinion is that since Nilsen was a trained chef, courtesy of the army, where Nilsen was in the catering corps, which is where he first laid his foundation for butchering meat, Nilsen used to invite or lure some of the victims over for a decently cooked meal, only for him to later turn on them if he felt the urge to. This happened for one of his victims. His third victim was Martin Duffy. He was only 16 years old. He met Nilsen on May 1980 while on a train to London. Martin Duffy and Kenneth James Ockenden were two of the 4 people whose full names Nilsen recalled. The police had to find other ways to identify the remaining 11. Up to date, 8 of the men killed on Melrose Avenue remain unidentified. Graham Allen was 28 years old when he met his untimely death. He was desperate for money to buy drugs. He met Nilsen on the West End of London, went back with him to Cranley Gardens and was killed that same day. Nilsen referred to Graham as the omelette guy because he cooked an omelette for Graham and then strangled him from behind as he ate. Some parts of Graham's remains were recovered from the drains. Stephen Sinclair was Nilsen's last victim. He was 20 years old, jobless and homeless. He went missing after a night out with friends on January 26, 1983. He was murdered 1 week before Nilsen's arrest. Have you ever heard any story regarding Denis Nilsen's murders? Please tell us in the comment section below. Nilsen was 6 years old when he had his first encounter with death. His dad was a visiting Norwegian soldier, so he was raised by his Scottish mom with the help of his grandfather. Most of the times he spent with his grandfather. They became close to the extent that they went fishing together, until one day, Nilsen came home from school and met his mom in the living room. His mom asked him whether he wanted to see his grandfather. Nilsen said, "Oh yes." His mother then led him to the kitchen, and on the kitchen table there was a long box and his grandfather lay in there dead. His grandfather had died at sea while fishing. He had been brought home for burial. Young Nilsen had no knowledge that his granddad, whom he so dearly loved, had died. That, according to authors and experts, was the first time Nilsen had a distorted view of death, where he coupled love with death. Another theory out there is that Nilsen was a necrophiliac. That is someone who is sexually attracted to dead bodies. By the way, is this really a thing? Please comment in the comment section whether you have ever encountered a necrophiliac or heard about one. Nilsen also felt in control over dead bodies. In an interview with Killer Denis, Nilsen narrated a story that during his childhood, he was bullied at school because of his feminine nature, which the other kids did not accept and which Nilsen felt he could not hide. Remember, Nilsen used to live around a fishing zone in his younger days. So, on one instance, he saw the body of one of the boys who used to bully him being pulled out of the water. The bully had drowned while fishing. Nilsen watched the body being pulled out of the sea and found it very sexually attractive. Right there and then, he felt very supreme and knew that he was in control since the corpse of the bully could not bully him anymore, so to speak. His attraction towards corpses that had been drowned or pulled out of the sea did not end there, as most of his victims and survivors thereafter confessed to having been drowned by Nilsen. Since his teenage years, Nilsen owned a camera which nurtured his love for photography. His camera was a way of memory keeping. In that way, he always had those whom he loved with him through the pictures. In much later years while in the army, Nilsen used to make his friends lie down on the ground and pretend that they had been shot. He would later up his game to the point of applying makeup on his own face so as to look dead. He would then stand in front of a mirror so that he could fantasize that he was a corpse. He was fascinated by death and corpses. In the years before committing his first murder, Nilsen once had a relationship with a man named David Garrison. The two shared the flat at Melrose Avenue before he had started murdering there. The relationship lasted 18 months. In 1976, they recorded a home video showing their stay together. Although Nilsen insisted that this relationship was not sexual, the cops thought otherwise. The cops got the impression that Nilsen and David lived as husband and wife. The video shows Nilsen heading to work and Garrison being left behind to take care of the chores and pets. The two even bought Bleep the dog together. The video also shows a domineering Nilsen who always wants to be in control over everything and everyone. He is seen shouting and commanding Garrison all over the place. I guess it was not a surprise that Garrison suddenly left, but to Nilsen, this was the worst thing that could ever happen to him. He never in a million years thought that Garrison would ever leave, but yeah, it happened. Criminologists and cops thought that this is what ignited Nilsen every time he had a guy over and he thought, oh my goodness, I really like this guy. Is he gonna leave like Garrison left? Garrison died in 1992, but he stated before his passing that never at any time did Nilsen ever abuse him or try to hurt him. Nilsen pointed the corpse to other men whom he had tried to kill but had managed to escape. This made the cops very elated as they now had live witnesses to question. Remember, all this time, the cops are still trying to establish the motive for the murders, so they hoped that those survivors will help them determine the why. Nilsen confessed that he had on about 7 occasions made unsuccessful attempts to kill people. The cops had been called a couple of those times and allegations made about strangulation. But on reaching the apartment and seeing the situation, Nilsen will tell them that the man who called them was drunk and the cops never used to act further. One of the survivors was a man named Carl Stotter. Carl met Nilsen at the age of 21. Nilsen invited Carl back to his place. They got into a cab which took them to 23 Cranley Gardens. The two had a couple of drinks and they listened to Laurie Anderson's O Superman. Carl felt the awful smell of the house, but assumed that since the house seemed old, it was that smell that old houses usually have. Nilsen had also mentioned to him that he had a dog, so Carl thought it was those doggy smells, but the smell never bothered Carl that much at the time. After a while, they went to bed. There was a little bit of physical contact, not much. Then Nilsen told Carl to be aware of the sleeping bag zip, which had kind of come out from the sleeping bag, because he could get caught up in the zip. They then went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Carl woke up with the sleeping bag zip around his neck. He put his hand up to see where the pressure was coming from, but at the same time, he was frantically looking for Nilsen, whom he thought was trying to help him. The next thing Carl remembered is being immersed in cold water. Nilsen was trying to drown him. When Carl came to, he could not recall what happened clearly. So Nilsen told him that he got caught up in the sleeping bag zip. Carl then said something about the water, to which Nilsen replied that he had to put Carl in cold water because he was in shock. But Carl knew something terribly wrong had happened. He was in excruciating pain and his face was swollen. He had blood hemorrhages all over his face. Finally, after 2 days, Nilsen let Carl leave his flat. So Carl did the most sensible thing. He went to a hospital. And the doctor told him, "Oh, I think someone is trying to kill you." And Carl was amazed because he was thinking that if someone was trying to kill you, they're not going to let you walk out of their house. But the human mind is very powerful because 3 months later, Carl began having flashbacks. He talked to his family, who advised that he seek psychiatric help. Carl would later learn that Nilsen had tried to bring him back to life by giving him a heart massage and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Nilsen attributed his actions to a thin strand of love that he had towards Carl, but the cops thought that it was simply because Nilsen did not have any more room in the flat to keep another body. Carl Stotter's evidence and Nilsen's confession to the police provided a basis for the prosecution's case. The defense argued that Nilsen suffered from an abnormality of mind and was of diminished capacity at the time of the murders. During the trial, the prosecution read out the notes of all the interviews in open court. On 4th November 1983, Nilsen was found guilty of murder on 6 counts and attempted murder on 2 counts and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. However, in 1984, the Home Secretary made a decision to extend Nilsen's sentence to a whole life tariff. He served his life sentence in Full Saturn Maximum Security Prison near York until his death in May 12, 2018. In an inquest conducted after his death, it was heard that Nilsen died after spending his last 2 hours in excruciating pain. He suffered a ruptured abdominal aortic aneurysm, and as a result, he died covered in his own fecal material. The coroner concluded that he died of natural causes. Nilsen had been taken to hospital in York, where he underwent emergency surgery. Even though the surgery was successful, Nilsen succumbed to the blood loss and stress of the surgery. He was 72 years old when he passed on. Thank you for watching. If you like this true story and you would like to view more true stories, please hit that red subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you get notified every time we post a new video. Till next time, stay safe.